Hello, so today I'll be talking about buying real estate in the United States as a non-resident alien. So what is a non-resident alien? A non-resident alien is a person who is not a US citizen, who is not a US tax resident, who doesn't have a green card, etc. So it's someone that doesn't have any links to the United States. So let's say you are Australian or South African, or you're from Germany and you want to invest in the United States. You don't have any links to the US, you still live in your home country or in another country, then the IRS, so the tax authorities in the United States, consider you as a non-resident alien. So this is absolutely not a video for US people. So I'm going to share 10 facts that people should know when investing in the United States in real estate as a non-resident alien. And I know this because I did it myself, so I'm speaking from experience. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ladislas Maurice from thewanderinginvestor.com. I travel around the world full-time looking at unique investment and immigration opportunities, and you can follow me throughout my travels. So, first one is the structure that you use to buy real estate in the United States is absolutely crucial. So it's not like in Europe where 95% of people just buy real estate in their own name. In the US it's different, especially for non-resident aliens. So if you buy real estate in your own name in the United States, in most cases but not all, you will have to pay a 30% withholding tax on gross income, so without any deductions whatsoever. So you rent your property out for $2,000, you'll have $600 a month to pay to the IRS without any deductions allowed. So very negative, that absolutely kills your yield. So the way to go around this is to create a local LLC, a single member LLC, and to buy the real estate through the LLC. So it requires some planning. You need to either do it yourself. It's fairly easy to do online yourself. I did it myself. Or you can use a lawyer or a tax professional to help you create the LLC. Secondly, it's important for people to understand, especially Europeans, that Americans have a different attitude towards real estate than Europeans, for example. Real estate tends to depreciate a lot faster in the United States than it does in Europe, from not just from a physical point of view, but also from an emotional point of view. Europeans are a lot more attached to their homes than Americans are. Americans will sell a house in a heartbeat if they found a job in another city or in another state. For Europeans, it's a bit more emotional and complicated. And then you have houses and apartments that have been around for hundreds of years, and those have intrinsic historical value that you rarely find in the United States. So it's a market where things rotate a lot more. People will buy a house, live in the house for 8, 9, 10 years, and then buy a new house down the road because it's newer and nicer. But this is not something you would typically see in Europe. So you need to understand that Americans are very different, and you need to adapt yourself when investing in the market. And again, America isn't one country. It's a lot of very different states with a lot of different mentalities. So you want to spend time on the ground to try to understand how does that local market that you're looking at really operating, and what do people look for and value in real estate, so that you don't end up buying a condo from the 70s, which you as a European may think is fairly recent, but which in the US is actually an old condo that few people actually want. And going back to the point of creating an LLC, it's not just for tax purposes, but also to protect yourself from lawsuits. So the US is the champion of suing people all the time. Up to 1/3 of active US businesses get sued on any given year. So it's not like in Europe. If your tenant slips because he was stupid, he'll find a way to blame you and he'll sue you. And if you don't have the right asset protection strategy in place, you could lose pretty much everything. So it's very important to just create that company, not just for tax purposes, but for asset protection. 4, politics matter. When you invest in the United States, it's a bit like investing in the European Union. It's a set of very different states/countries that each have their own system of governance and taxes. So you want to look into, do you want to invest in Democratic states or in Republican states? The reality is that generally, as an investor, Republican states are a lot more friendly. So if you have issues in Texas trying to kick tenants out, when there isn't a moratorium, from the federal government, within a few weeks your tenants are taken out, and the sheriff comes, and then the guy's furniture end up on the street, and he's got to go if he wasn't paying you. If the same scenario were to happen in California or New York, your tenant stops paying, it could take months, even years, to kick people out. So this is very important. So if you believe that we're entering a world where people will have less disposable income, then there's probably more risk in terms of unpaid rent. So you want to make sure that you invest in states that will protect you as the investor rather than the tenant. Fifth, property taxes can be huge in the United States. So some states that don't levy any state income tax make up for it through high property taxes. So Texas is one of those states. No income tax, which is very interesting, but if you're just buying one or two properties, chances are you're actually better off buying in a state with a bit of income tax, because your property tax will be a lot lower, and the income tax typically hits people on the higher income bracket, but if you don't have too much income in the United States, it wouldn't be that much of an issue. So look into that, look into property taxes, because they vary from one city, from one county, from one state to another. It's all very different. You have to take this into account. You can't just assume, oh, it's going to be 0.5%, because that's generally what it is in that country somewhere in Europe. It really, really varies. And the same goes for HOA dues, so homeowners association dues. This is very important because some of them can be very expensive and absolutely kill your yield, because people want extra security or a little communal garden or something. You want to be very cognizant of this. So the United States is one of those countries where you could have two houses that are very similar across from each other, literally one street to the next, but the metrics are completely different. The property tax can be very different because of the school district. The homeowners association fees can be extremely different as well. And because of the school district, the valuation of the house can be very different. So it's important to really not just look at the numbers, but you really need to understand them. Why is a house cheaper than the other across the street? It's not necessarily because it's a better deal, it's because there's generally something else going on, like the school districts that I mentioned, which is my point number 6. So it's not, investing in the United States is not like investing in Norway, where pretty much all schools are fine. School districts matter in the United States. So if you're registered in a house in a certain school district, you may have access to either fantastic schools, which means that people are going to be willing to pay a massive premium to be registered in that house because their kids will go to the good local government school. But the house across the street, which is cheaper, which looks the same, well, maybe the kids that are registered in that house have to go somewhere inside the city to some really bad schools. So very important. School districts, you need to look into the school district. It's a whole industry in the United States. There are all these rankings of school districts, etc. So you need to take this into account when buying real estate. Very, very important. And it's also a market that's very data driven. So there is something called the multiple listings system. Essentially all the data on every house in the US, every apartment is available. Who bought it, for how much, when, how much was the property tax for the last 10 years, when was it sold, for how much, what's the valuation, how much would the rent be approximately. All that data is right there. And in some cities like Durham in North Carolina, up to almost 15% of houses are purchased by iBuyers, like artificial intelligence buyers of real estate that just buy and then flip, etc. So that's how data driven it is. So if you see a house and you're like, oh my God, this house is so much cheaper than the other ones around, there's generally a reason, because there's enough data for software to pick it up, for Americans to pick it up, for neighbors to pick it up. So it's a market where it's very hard as a foreigner, if you just go there for a few weeks, to get a better deal than the average, because all the data is accessible to everyone. Point number 8, when you buy real estate, you go through a title company in the US. So it's a bit like a notary public in Europe. So you wire the money to the title company, and then they transfer the title to you, and then they transfer the money to the seller. So you want to have a conversation with the title company beforehand in terms of money, because I came across, that was my own case, I cut a deal. We agreed on a price with the seller. I wanted to buy the real estate, and then the title company told me, oh no, we can't accept money from outside of the United States. Why? They just had this internal policy. It was completely stupid, but it could have killed the deal. So they wanted me to transfer the money through my US LLC and then to the title company. Luckily, I already had my LLC's bank account ready, and I had to funnel the funds through that bank account. Those are the sorts of discussions you want to be having beforehand. Ninth, just be aware that the IRS, the Internal Revenue Services, are absolutely not your friend. They are a nightmare to deal with. You can wait for hours on the phone to try to sort out anything. And very importantly, something that never gets discussed anywhere is, as a non-resident alien, when you sell real estate in the United States, you must comply with FIRTPA. So what is this? Essentially, it means that when you sell a house, the IRS automatically withholds 15% of the value of your house to make sure that you pay your capital gains taxes. And once you've filed your income tax return and you've paid your capital gains taxes, then they can process their reimbursement. If you're selling real estate that is below $300,000 and where the buyer is buying it for himself to live rather than rent out, you're not subject to FIRTPA, so that's good. But in every other case, you are. And getting that money can take 2 to 3 years. So personally, it took me 2 to 3 years when I had to deal with it. It was not pleasant having to wait this much to get my money back. And the IRS is absolutely not helpful. So just be aware of it. When you sell, you're gonna have to wait for parts of your money. And number 10, very importantly, choose your bank account wisely. So you don't want to deal with a bank because that's where you'll receive your rental income. You don't want to deal with a bank that once you're overseas, they'll tell you, oh no, to make an international wire, you have to come in person to the bank, or that they tell you, oh, you actually need a US number or a personal address or whatever. You want to make sure that the bank understands that what the purposes of the company is. You are there, you bought real estate, you're getting rental income, you live overseas, you're a non-resident alien, and you want, once every 6 months to make a transfer outside of the US remotely, and you want to be able to use your debit card overseas as well. So it's very important that you have that conversation with your bank. Personally, I prefer mid-tier local banks. Pretty much everywhere in the States, you find these state banks. Essentially, they're local banks that are well known in that state. They typically focus on local businesses. So if you go to one of those branches, you explain your situation, you ask to meet compliance, you explain. If they're fine with it, then you'll be good, because there's a lot more personal rapport with these banks than if you're with Bank of America. There's just one compliance change. They don't care. They shut down your account, and then you have a problem. There are also some online bank accounts that you can use for US companies such as Mercury Bank. That's also an option. You can manage everything remotely. I'll just add a few more points which are not in the list of 10, but America is a country where real estate is a lot more volatile than in other markets. It's highly dependent on interest rates, so you want to make sure that you understand this. It's more of a commodity. It goes up and down more than in other markets. And lastly, a pleasant note is that working with Americans is very nice. And it's often an issue that Americans and generally North Americans have when they invest overseas or they invest in developing countries. Property management is generally subpar everywhere in the world apart from North America. Like, you can find very professional people to work with, very professional property managers, realtors, CPAs. You get great service. Americans are easy to work with. There are no ambiguities. I like that a lot. It's a lot easier than dealing with property managers in the Balkans, in Africa, in the Middle East, Latin America. So that's always a pleasure. So your experience as a customer, because ultimately that's what you are for these people, is a lot superior compared to what you would be getting even in Western Europe. So this is one very pleasant aspect of doing business in the United States. People are competent and professional, which is absolutely not the case across most of the world. If you like this sort of content, make sure to subscribe to my private list where I travel around the world. I talk about real estate markets all over the world. I do analysis. If you're interested about other real estate markets, feel free to check out the real estate services part of my blog. There's a link below, and there's a number of articles on real estate markets all over the world.